Hello, hi there, and welcome to another amazing episode of Learning Leadership 321 with myself, Brian Webster. And today I'm joined by the amazing Stuart Tuckwood. Now, I've known Stuart for many years. We've worked together on many things through the union that he works for, Unison. He's been a great friend and coach in leadership informally, and we are going to today discuss his leadership journey. So, Stuart's bio is, as usual, extensive. Like all our guests, he's an adult nurse. He's the National Officer for Nursing at the trade union Unison, which is one of the largest in the UK. He's worked overseas in neurosurgery, major trauma, and critical care. And he has a professional diploma in tropical nursing as well as a master's in public health from the University of London. So I probably should reach out to him about my new textbook I'm going to be writing. He spent a few months as director at the Florence Nightingale Foundation and came back to Unison quite a few months ago now. So let's jump right in. Let's hear all about Stuart's leadership style, what he sees as great leadership and maybe not so much, and we'll take it from there. Hope you enjoy.
So, hi Stuart, thanks for coming along to Learning Leadership 321 with myself, Brian Webster. And today we're going to obviously talk all about your leadership styles, your experience, your exposure, your points and tips for the listeners, and hopefully give everyone a bit of an idea of how to be a good leader, if there's such a thing. So, well, we jump right in with a bit of an icebreaker, and I'll ask you today a bit of gratitude. So, what's made you smile today?
The thought of going on holiday in 2 days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, the sun was shining this morning, and I live in Liverpool at the moment, and so I always smile whenever the sun's out, and I was able to take my little boy into nursery on the back of our bike, which I can't always do when it's pouring with the rain. So that
No,
was nice.
good. Okay, so it's those small things, isn't it? It doesn't have to be a massive thing that makes you smile.
Yeah, like I say, any day when the sun is shining, that makes me smile.
Definitely, but hopefully you get lots of sun on holiday.
Yeah, can't wait.
So next year we'll read you a quote, and it's based on your leadership style, actually, on collective leadership. So it says, "When there's collective leadership, there's the power to make change." So what do you think about that quote? Just off 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and this is why I've chosen to talk about a collective leadership style. I think there's a lot of talk about leadership nowadays, and obviously this is the theme of your podcast, and loads of people do work on leadership and nursing, and I think sometimes that can emphasize a bit too much the individual nature of things. There's a lot of inspirational quotes out there about how much of a difference one committed person can make and all that, and that is true, and leaders do make a difference. But I think we make the biggest change when we work together, and obviously that's why I'm a trade unionist and why I work for Unison. So I think leadership is important, and trying to encourage others to work together to achieve goals with you is the best way. And I'll fire a quote back at you, but there's the old classic of, if you want to go quick, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together.
Oh, wow.
I know that's a very, very neat quote, but I think the lesson of it's very true. If you actually want to achieve something meaningful, you need to do it together.
Definitely. Love that. I really like that. Now, if I write notes, please don't be offended.
No, it's okay. I think it's an African quote. I was at an event where someone said that was African, and then someone else claimed that it was Indian. So there's a lot of competition to claim that quote, but it's very good anyway, whoever it is.
It is definitely good, yeah. Okay, doke. So, first part of the podcast is about your 3 points on leadership, Stuart. So, there could be positive points, as in you as a leader, or it could be when you've been in a team where it's had an amazing leader. It could be anything you want that you feel is positive about leadership that we could learn from.
Yeah, great. I've had a bit of a think about that. So these are probably on the basis of reflections on leadership that I've shown, but also mostly, from what I've learned from being led, from working in teams with good leaders, both, in the NHS, doing care work as I used to, and obviously my role at Unison now. So I've got three that are quite interesting, I think. So the first one I think I'll start with is something I learned that was really interesting that stuck with me. I stood for Parliament a few years ago in the general election in 2017, and I got some training and support through a kind of leadership program to help me with that. This was for the Green Party that I was in at the time, And one of the people who was training me said, brace yourself for how not good some of the other candidates will be. Basically, believe in yourself. Like, don't go up there thinking that you're not capable, that everybody else is going to be much, much better than you. That's kind of stuck with me. I know that could seem quite negative, but actually, if you flip it, it's quite positive that a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and we all do. A lot of people have said to me at times, "Oh, you did a good job there, or that was great, and you looked like you were very confident." And I know that inside I was thinking, God, do I know what I'm doing? Am I going to manage this? Am I doing okay? So I think it's always good to remember that everybody else is having those doubts as well. You might be sitting at the table, taking part in a negotiation, or working together on some kind of project or something, and you might be thinking everybody else is much more qualified than me. Everybody else knows this subject better than me. And actually, it's always really important to remember that actually you know what you're talking about. You are qualified, you are capable, and to believe in yourself. And I think nursing, that's particularly important in nursing, because particularly when we're working in multidisciplinary teams, or we're, advocating for the profession, I think nurses sometimes often actually really undervalue ourselves against other people, like doctors or, other professions. So it's really important, I think, to remember that, particularly when you're a nurse, you really do know what you're talking about. As long as you're prepared, do make sure that you feel confident enough to stand up and get across what you want to get across. So that's always been something that I've tried to kind of remember when I'm going into a difficult meeting or into some kind of situation where I'm up against people who have got great qualifications or titles or anything like that.
Definitely. And do you think there's a time and a place for imposter syndrome, just to pick into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it gets a very negative rap nowadays, imposter syndrome, but actually it's healthy to have a bit of doubt to drive yourself to be better and to be well prepared. So have confidence that when you prepare, you will be good, but you do need to do the preparation. I think you see some people sometimes who have got to a level in their career where they have the title, they have the expertise, and they don't feel like they need to do that hard work anymore. So I think a healthy amount of, okay, I'm going to have to take this really seriously. I'm up against some, great people, or I'm going into a really difficult argument or negotiation. So I need to be sure of my facts and have done my research and preparation. So yeah, I don't think it's always necessarily a bad thing, but I think it becomes bad when it's obviously undermining your confidence or it's holding you back.
Yeah, or if it becomes crippling, yeah, definitely. What else was I going to say about that? Has there ever been a time when you've used your confidence to stand up to someone?
Yeah, I mean, many times. It's part of being a trade union negotiator and a leader, isn't it? I've never been one of those people that believes that you have to like bang the table and shout to be heard, but you do need to. Well, a really good example very early on in the COVID pandemic, we were having these calls, just that we didn't even have Teams at the time. We were just to dial into this mobile phone meeting, and it was chief nursing officers of each of the nations. It's the chief executive, people from the NHS, and I was quite new to Unison at the time. And there was a point at which I was sitting there thinking, I really don't agree with this approach. I really feel like I have to say something, and I have to kind of begin to say it. And I was almost sweating, like the anxiety of it, sitting there worried, but was brave enough to do it. And and I think I can't remember what the point was, but I remember that we did manage to have a good, meaningful discussion on achieve something. So there's plenty of times where you might be sitting there thinking, I'm not the right person to say this, or I haven't got the qualifications. But as long as you believe in what you're saying and you can evidence it, then you've got to have that confidence. It's not easy; it's difficult, but we can all do it, I think.
Definitely, yeah. And I suppose it is like you say, the way you say it, isn't it? There's times when you in your role will have to say some tough things, and that might be to people's face, it might be on social media through Unison, but it's about how you say it, isn't it? And not just saying actually that's wrong, but well, this is why it's wrong, and this is why an alternative is right. So
yeah, you have to be forceful, and you have to provide evidence for what you're saying. But there's you can do that and be respectful still, and respect the other person even though you disagree. That's the heart of how we improve things a lot of the time, is professional disagreement, but respecting the position that other people have. It's a particularly difficult thing to do as a trade union and a leader, because you're quite often seen as the negative person, the person that's having to bring the difficult issue to the table. But for me, and this won't necessarily apply to all the other leaders you speak to, I'll often have to go back and answer to the members, or I'm in those meetings where I'm hearing the concerns and I know what our members and our NHS staff are going through. So I always try and remember that when I'm in those kind of conversations and meetings, that okay, it may look rosy at this moment, but remember you've got those people that they're out there working on the shop floor, on the front line. You're here to get their points across. So sometimes that will cause some disquiet and uncomfortable, make the conversation uncomfortable, but that's what you're there for. That's why you're being paid.
Yeah, definitely. And I quite liked what you said about that professional disagreement. Was it disagreement you said? I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, and it's healthy. I
Yeah.
actually think sometimes there's probably another lesson. I didn't put this in my top 3, but when you're all agreeing with each other, actually, that can be a bigger problem in the longer run. If you're organizations where everybody, says yes to the leader and no one points out when they're doing something wrong, those are the organizations that end up with big problems that they haven't thought about.
I quite like what you said about as well, obviously being trade unionists, having that expectation that you have to go back to your members. And I wonder if we could learn something from that as leaders, that sometimes we and the leaders that we have don't close that feedback loop, and they'll maybe go to meetings or things and big decisions are made, but it doesn't quite filter down, or when it does, it's not came from the leader, it's maybe third, fourth, fifth hand, so it ends up with arms and legs. So maybe we need to learn a bit more about that possible obligation to feedback.
It's obviously not just trade union people, is it? Like, let's say you're a chief nurse in an organization, then you have to go to the board and explain why you need more investment in nursing, or why you need some money for a project or something. And I suppose for them it's just the same. They're thinking, I'm the voice in this room for these people that are in my workforce, and I need to speak up. But yeah, your point's absolutely right. I think we definitely don't do that enough. I'm really keen on doing that as a union leader as much as I can. Sometimes going back to the members and saying we weren't able to achieve this thing, and this is why. This situation's difficult. We couldn't get everything we wanted. Because I think it's a big problem actually amongst trade unions, is over promising sometimes and then not coming back and explaining why we couldn't achieve everything we wanted. But actually, there's a reason for that. We avoid it because we don't want to disappoint people, and you don't want to think badly of you. But in the long run, it's better to be honest with people and and actually, I think people trust you and respect you if you come back and say, I'm sorry, I couldn't do this thing for you, but there's a reason for that, and we'll try again another time. We'll try a different tactic, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, doke. Perfect. Will we go into your second tip or second point?
This ties into that first point, so won't go into too much detail, but I think it's really important, no matter what level of leader you are, just that you always treat people the way you would want to be treated.
Yeah.
And that's a tenet of human rights more fundamentally. But from a self-interest point of view as a leader, I think it's also really important because you're dealing with so many different people, and when you get to a high leadership position, and I've seen this, there are some people who think maybe they don't need to spend too much time anymore speaking to people that are in positions beneath them or who have less power. But everything kind of comes around eventually. I think if you go around treating people badly, eventually there'll be enough people out there who've got a grudge against you who will help you. And it just, we all know what it's like to work for a leader that you respect, who respects you. You buy into what they want and you help them achieve those things. Whereas organizations where people don't respect the leaders, the teams are undermined because people are not pulling together. So I think it's a really fundamental thing, just in everything you do as a leader. You might be answering 1,000 emails a day, but it doesn't cost you a lot to just say thank you, please, to be kind, to be polite. And that also boils down to I think showing an interest and listening to people. So you might think you've got all the qualifications and all the expertise and you really know a subject, but that's quite dangerous. I think complacency sets in at that point. So treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Listen to them. If they have ideas, and sometimes they might be wrong, and you might have to say, I disagree with that, but at least give them the time to listen to them. And I think that the biggest compliment you can pay someone is giving them your attention, actually. So regardless of, there's a lot of organizations out there that have award schemes now and employee of the month, all that kind of stuff. But actually, what people really value a lot of the time is that just listening to them and showing that you've respected them by giving them the time to share their views. So I think that's always important to remember, no matter what level of leader you are.
Definitely, yeah. And it always fascinates me in nursing, but in healthcare in general, big organisations and think tanks like the King's Fund and the likes of Michael West talk about compassion and, all this types of things. But then we also, on the other side of that double-edged sword, hear about nurses eating their own young. And I wonder, how do we get from this compassionate, empathetic, caring profession to the patient, hopefully, or the people we look after, to be in a profession that, chews up and spits out its own new nurses and old nurses, and it's an interesting sort of
Yeah,
juxtaposition.
it's easy to say and it's not easy to do because obviously all these people are in high pressured roles with lots of expectations and demands on them. I'm saying I'm giving these tips, but I know that I don't always stick to them. Like there are times that I fail to do these things. But still, even the best leaders, even when they're really harried and really under pressure, they can still you can say that to people. You can say, "I'm really sorry, I haven't got time to listen to you at the moment," or "We'll have to come back to this," or like, "I just don't have, there's just no time at the moment," while still being polite and respectful of that, isn't there? But it's amazing. You'll find that the best leaders do somehow make the time to make the people that work with them feel valued and listened to somehow. I'm going to give some examples later on and talk about leaders that I've worked with.
Yeah.
Some of the people at Unison, for example, amazing the amount of stuff they have to juggle, but will still find the time to listen to you about what you want to do or what you want to achieve. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's easy, but definitely needs to be done.
Definitely. Okay, and what's your last tip, Stuart?
Yeah, this is the first one that I wrote down, and then thought I'd come to it last. But it sounds really simple, but just not being human, just acknowledging that you are a person that makes mistakes. I've seen lots of leaders really trip up by almost trying to be infallible, just thinking that that what they say goes, or that they just can't admit to being wrong about something or making a mistake. And we're all under pressure working in healthcare and working for trade unions, particularly obviously, as you know, working through the whole COVID times. And there were a few of our leaders at that point during the COVID pandemic, particularly, that were willing to show that they were struggling or things were difficult. And I think again, it's difficult to do because when you're in a leadership position, everyone expects you to be strong and to deliver, to not let them down. I think in the longer run, they trust you and respect you more if you do show the human side as well. So I could think of a few examples during COVID of leaders I worked with nationally, who were willing to kind of be like, "Yeah, that was a mistake," or we shouldn't have done that, but we were under too much pressure, and I'm really struggling with this, so please just give me some time. I think ultimately you just trust those people more, and you're willing to give them a bit of leeway because whereas if they're saying, "Oh, I've done everything right, I'm not going to listen to you," I'm kind of, not many people would say they were perfect, but they're kind of giving off that impression.
Yeah.
I don't trust those people in the same way. I don't buy into their style of leadership, I don't think.
Definitely, and it probably ties into your chosen style of that collective leadership style. And I'm probably experiencing this a bit myself, starting a new job as a trainee district nurse, because as well as having that clinical element, I've also now got that formal leadership element of managing a team of the 4 or 5 or 6 community nurses and a few assistant practitioners and things. But some of the team members in my team have got 20 years community experience compared to my 1 year of out of hours community experience, so I'm absolutely there as the trainee district nurse and as the leader, but I'm having to lean on them for, like, what do I do with this chronic wound, or what do I do with this challenging situation that I've not came across before, and they respect me for that, and then vice versa, they respect me because I've done some formal leadership stuff and things compared to some of the other people who might not have, who were interviewed for the post. So yeah, okie doke.
Yeah, definitely. I think all nursing roles, there's so much complex things that we do, and there are so many different situations you can encounter that anyone who tries to pretend that they know everything is fake.
Yeah, it's
And
dangerous.
yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah, exactly. It's all in our professional code that you all have to work to the level of your own level of competency, and you have to ask for support and ask for help. And that, I think, every single registered nurse should remember that. But particularly for me, I'm the national officer for nursing, but nursing, I'm an adult nurse. I've got a background in critical care, but obviously there's also children's learning disability, mental health. There are 4 UK nations that have got different frameworks. There are the NHS, social care. There's absolutely no way. There's no one on earth that could be an expert in all those things all the time. And things quite often come to me and people in unison. What's your opinion on this pediatric surgical waiting list problem or something? Yeah, and I found it quite stressful at the beginning because I felt like I had to have all the answers. I've learned over time that it's okay to say, look, no, I'm definitely not an expert at that. I will find out. I'll research it and I'll go speak to people and I'll get their expertise, and I'll find you an answer. But don't pretend to know you don't, because obviously that ultimately just builds up more problems. Hopefully, I think the people that I've dealt with who've come to me with those kind of issues respect that I will try and find an answer, but I'm not going to pretend that I know everything. But that applies almost in every leadership position in nursing, I think. So yeah, and we're moving more towards a time now where people are being promoted more quickly. And if they want to climb the career ladder, you don't necessarily need to wait 5-10 years in band 5 anymore. So the situation you're in is happening more and more often. So it's good that you found a way to adjust to that. I think there are other places where nurses wouldn't be so happy with a younger member of staff telling them what to do and things. But yeah, I think that's the only genuine way to do it, is what you're doing, isn't it? To try and be as good as you can be, but acknowledge when you don't know something, or you made a mistake or something like that.
Definitely. It's quite funny because I am the youngest in the team, so it's quite interesting, yeah. But I was going to say, just on your point there, it's interesting as well. I think there's a tiny bit of possibility of not looking to the experts, because we know from the likes of, Alison Leary, she talks about when she spent time at NASA and what she learned from the likes of NASA and other organisations that we should bring to healthcare. So sometimes having an expert in something isn't always great, is it? Because there will be elements of bias. And I remember this from university. One of the deans of the School of Nursing was not a nurse, and she was the most approachable and most open. There was no black and white. There was always maybe a grey, and it was much more she didn't have nurse blinkers on, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I remember hearing an example of I think it was a paediatric ICU who were trying to see how they could process or speed up the process of moving a critically ill child from one area to the other. And they got in a Formula One team to do it, to help them, to show them, well, this is the steps that you should take, and you should do this and you should do that. Because obviously when the car stops in the pit stop, it's like wheels off, wheels on, gone. So I think there is stuff to be learned from other industries.
It's a really interesting debate. We probably don't have the time to talk enough about it, but there's a healthy amount of learning from others, and there's a lot now where the government basically doesn't trust the professionals in a certain setting. So there was the whole thing about the government, the blob in education of teachers, people who will hold everything back because they think they know best. And I think people think the same about healthcare, doctors and nurses. We think we know best, and we're not open to being challenged by others. So there's a healthy balance. I think you have to trust experts and local decision makers, that they know what they're talking about, and you can trust their decision. Because that's an interesting thing about NASA. I don't know if Alison has talked about this, but they've got kind of safety system whereby, and I'm not an expert on this, so I might describe this wrong, but basically anyone at any level is saying there's something wrong with this project, you don't launch the spaceship, or you don't progress the project until that's fixed. You trust, absolutely, because obviously if you have a system where you listen to the leader at the top who says everything's fine, and you ignore that person, then the spaceship blows up, whatever happens.
Yeah.
People have compared that to the NHS, where we have people all over the place saying this is not safe, this is not good, and we have to just continue working anyway and make the best of it. So we probably don't trust and give enough responsibility to listen to those experts and leaders at every level.
Definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the whole Boeing situation at the minute, about the aircrafts and the chaps not having a great time whose whistle blew, and obviously that reflects into the NHS as well. But I seen a tweet the other night about staffing, and it was similar to the airline industry, and it was like, you wouldn't send an airplane up missing a pilot, so why is it okay to run an ICU on 3 nurses? But we better move on, Stuart, with the time. I can't actually remember where we are. Was that your 3 points? Have we done your 2 good examples yet?
Yeah, so maybe just briefly for the sake of time, but well, I'll do one kind of clinical example and one more from a trade union example. But
yep,
COVID going back to COVID, so at the local level, during the pandemic, I went back and worked in ICU, and obviously that was a time when that local leadership was so much more important in terms of how a leader could inspire confidence in you, and at a very basic level, like stop you being frightened. Like people were scared, going into ICU and you're all in the staff room getting ready for a shift. You're about to go into PPE, basically can't speak to each other for the rest of the shift, and just had such good ICU band sixes, band sevens, who would not consider themselves as organizational leaders, but they were coming in, instilling you with confidence, managing the teams, assigning people. There were people coming in who were volunteers, pediatric nurses, neuro overseas nurses who were probably terrified, didn't know what they were doing, but were still willing to go in and help. And the leadership that I saw at that local level at the time was just so good. It really reinforced me how lucky we are to have the NHS and to have the workforce that we've got. People really stepped up and looked after. I mean, where I was anyway, you really felt looked after and supported, and like you had good local leaders, which made such a difference.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't the case for everybody everywhere, but that's what I saw, and that stuck with me, just how important that was. But then nationally at the same time as well, it was a very interesting time in the trade union because it was such an emergency that suddenly like all the doors were open and we were all having much more access to government ministers and NHS leaders, the NMC, etc., in a more direct way. Normally, things take quite a long time. To be honest, trade unions, particularly at the moment, the government we've got, are kept at arm's length. Whereas because it was an emergency, we were all, the trade unions were even talking to Sunak at the time about the furlough scheme and how it should be set up and all those kind of things. And it was the same with us. And I know a lot of the healthcare leaders on the government and employer side were probably frustrated with us because there were days where we just went back and forth on versions of documents, on policy, on safe staffing, etc. There must have been about 100 revisions of certain documents before they went out. Yeah, and some of these people were staying up all night rewriting them and taking on board our comments and stuff, which must have been really difficult, and respect them for it. But I think that everything we produced during that time, the guidance that went out to the system, because it was done in partnership, was so much better because of that. So that's coming back to this collective style of leadership. The people like Ruth May, Simon Stevens, leaders in the NHS at the time, could have probably been much more direct style of leadership, just gone, this is an emergency, we're doing it our way, we're not listening to anyone else. And I think they would have made, we made mistakes still, but I think you would have made bigger mistakes, and it would have been, the consequences would be much worse in the longer run. So I think that's a good lesson for working together. Can be harder to do leadership collectively, but actually you get better results because of it.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask me anything about that, or shall I go into a kind of second example?
No, I was thinking about like the different styles of leadership, and obviously we both know as nurses who've worked in critical care that there is a time for that authoritarian dictatorship. If someone's crashing, it's like, Stuart, you're on the chest, Brian, run and get blood, blah 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 blah. But yeah, so I guess COVID's quite a good hybrid of that, because we do need some of the authoritarian dictatorship as well as the compassionate collective stuff as well. So it's a good, I quite like how you've put that there was obviously people dying, but we had to think about, well, what are the consequences of being so authoritarian? Is that going to work? Probably not.
Yeah, it was like a chronic emergency, wasn't it? It was an emergency.
Yeah, that's a good,
the personal effects of that, people having to work, like it was an emergency for months, and obviously the consequences. Sometimes with that kind of situation you just described, you can be really direct because it's only going to be an hour and then you're going to move on. But actually, the decisions we were making at the time were going to have consequences 6 months down the line in terms of like how the NHS was going to recover from this, what was going to happen to students who wanted to qualify during, So yeah, I think a more direct style would have got us through the month, but you didn't get storm. So yeah, it was a really interesting time. I'm pretty sure everyone who went through that learned a lot about leadership because of it. The other example I was going to bring up was I didn't want to come on here and look like I was that's the best way of putting this, look like I was being a kiss arse, basically. But to give an example of a leader, someone who probably doesn't get as much recognition as she should have done, the head of health at Unison we've had until she's now on a secondment, so we've got an acting head of health at the moment, but Sarah Gordon, who's been the head of health at Unison for a little while until recently, was obviously the head of health during our dispute last year, and has been the chair of the NHS Staff Council for a while.
Mm.
Really, I think she's a really excellent leader, and I learned a lot from her. And I think externally, it's interesting because given what I know about her influence and what she does, I don't think she gets as much recognition for being such a good leader as she should do. So some of the things that I've seen her do, some of the things that I think make her such a good leader, she has to make very, very hard choices. Like, obviously, she's a leader of a union which has a lot of different healthcare groups in it: nurses, midwives, occupational therapists, physios, healthcare support workers, everybody. So she doesn't get the luxury of kind of just protecting one group of staff. She has to make trade-offs and compromises, which are sometimes unpopular. And what we prioritize in a negotiation sometimes means some people are unhappy. But a good leader doesn't get to be just virtuous all the time, and everyone loves them to sometimes take the punches. And she's very good at doing that, while also, as I've said before, coming back and explaining why we have to be a certain way and why we have to do something. And she's also, one of the lessons I've learned is about the long term. So anyone can kind of be in one meeting or one negotiation and really, be on it. But if it comes back to the collective leadership, when you're leading an organization as big as Unison, or let's say the NHS, you have to be collective, because there are so many. You have to have so many ducks in order to get something right. So when it comes to us leading a successful pay campaign for a pay rise, the work begins 18 months before, with like the evidence for the pay claim. How much are you going to ask for? Are you going to get your union to agree a negotiating position which you can then support and justify when you get into the negotiating room in a year's time? So you can't just focus on the end part, the strike and the publicity. You have to have been preparing for ages. And she's just extremely methodical, logical, and brings people within that to be so well prepared. So I think that, and she does that thing that I talked about earlier, which is just that being respectful of everybody. So obviously, so many different external people to deal with, but also internally in the union, so many different rungs of leaders, elected people within Unison she has to deal with, and does a very good job of making them all feel listened to, like they can trust her. She'll be honest with them and disappoint them sometimes, but people believe in her because of that. So yeah, when I came to Unison, I think I'd seen more of the kind of trade union leaders that you might more traditionally think of, like Bob Crow, Arthur Stargill, banging the table and giving big speeches and stuff. You just don't, I couldn't appreciate that how much work went on behind the scenes and how much depth there is to go on to organize a union before you get to that position. So she's incredible at doing that and juggling all those different responsibilities. So that's just a good example, I think, of collective leadership.
Good. Okay. Well, we've probably got about 7 minutes. So do you want to give us a few minutes on collective leadership? But I think we've already covered a lot of it, haven't we? But and I'll write a bit more about it in the accompanying blog. But why is this style your favoured style? And if we do get cut off, I do apologise, but I'm sure we won't. It's just 6 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I picked it, as I said at the beginning, because I think if you're going to achieve things meaningfully, you have to do it together. And that's why I'm a trade unionist. So it's an interesting position to be in, because yes, you could say I'm a leader within Unison and healthcare, but I'm only really in this position because more than 500,000 Unison members in health pay their subscriptions, vote in our elections, take part in our industrial action and things. So I'm not really a leader, really. I'm just kind of the person that gets in the room, standing on the shoulders of all the union members that work together. So without the union members, I don't have any influence over anything. I'm only there because our members do all those things. So that's, I suppose, fundamentally, that's why collective leadership works. So I think we sometimes take our trade unions for granted. A lot of nurses can be quite negative about our trade unions. But you have to remember, if we didn't have them, who would be in the room sticking up for you and putting your point of view across? And there is obviously there's advocacy groups and there's charities that speak up for healthcare workers, but I really value the independent, that I get to be an independent voice for nurses, and I have to speak up on their behalf. But as I said, I can only do that because I do it collectively. And building on that, I always try and remind people that I'm not in those meetings and not in the negotiations giving my own point of view all the time. Obviously, I build on my own expertise and what I know, but I'm following what the Unison members tell me to do. So we're a democracy. We have an elected health service group executive. We have our annual health conference, which was just last week in Brighton. So I follow the motions that unionist members put forward. I work on the campaigns and the priorities that I get that we pass at conferences. So of course it's collective leadership. I'm not just going in to speak to leaders and say, I think this thing's important, or I think you should do this. I say, we've passed this motion at conference. We've done this survey which shows however many thousands of unionist members believe this thing is the priority. It does work a bit both ways. So I obviously can influence unison members and our elected representatives. So sometimes I go to them and I say, I think this thing's a really big issue and actually we need to look into it, do some survey work, and then agree a campaign or something that we can build on. But at the end of the day, the decision making is theirs. They get to direct what we do. So yeah, so I don't think I could choose anything other than a collective style of leadership, because that's how I have to work. That's how we have to work.
Definitely. That's great. Yeah. No, that's really good.
And more broadly than just working for a trade union, as I say, the work that you produce and the outcomes of everything is much better when you do it collectively. So the NHS pay is a very good example. So when the government in the UK at Westminster has decided to set pay by itself, as it has done for 10 of the last 14 years or slightly more, it tends to not be a very good result, and people are dissatisfied, people are unhappy. Our pay has dropped a lot over the last 14 years, and that's because they've ignored trade unions and they've just done it by themselves most of the time. And it's not just about pay, it's about all our other terms and conditions, like how much of a promotion you get between the bands, unsocial hours, all these kind of things. And it kind of comes back to what I said earlier about COVID, but twice in the last 5 years, in 2018 and in last year, the government was forced to actually negotiate on things about pay and about terms and conditions. It's much harder. It's easier just to say 2% and get on with it. But actually, when they've negotiated with us, we've been able to highlight all these different problems that need to be fixed in the NHS with the banding, the structure, and we can do those things. And obviously, it's not just Unison, it's the 13 other NHS trade unions as well. So again, doing it collectively leads to a much better outcome for everyone. Whereas just acting by yourself, as the government has done so many times, thinking they've got all the answers and they have all the evidence on pay, that leads to a much worse outcome, I think. So yeah, you achieve stuff better when you work together. Oh, and just one final little point. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time.
No, that's fine. That's good, yeah.
Going back to, I talked to you quite a lot, obviously, during the COVID pandemic, and also to Joy and Natalie and other Unison students. During that time, we were making really urgent, quick decisions about student employment during the pandemic. And I couldn't wait to convene a Unison committee. I couldn't even if I wanted to, because it was lockdown, to ask for their advice on things. There was a point at which I was on the phone just going round and round different Unison members in these positions just to get your thoughts on, like, well, how does this land? What do you think about this option? And Joy, like Natalie in particular. And it was just so helpful for me, because you just got that initial feedback and that sense of, like, yes, that's the right thing, or I don't think that will work, from people who are going through it themselves. So again, if I'd kind of just sat there and thought, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to agree to these things or not, it was much better, even though it was harder, because I listened to our members and I sought out their opinions, and they helped. And obviously they were leading, they were really helping with improving those decisions. So we got much better outcome.
Good. Amazing. Okie doke. Well, thank you very much, Stuart. It's been amazing speaking to you. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope your holiday's great. And I hope you carry on to be the leader that you are.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. Good luck with the rest of the podcast.
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed that. We were a bit short on time, so didn't get to have the greatest conversation that we would have. We could have probably chatted for hours, me and Stuart, but it was a great episode. I hope you really liked it. So we talked about Stuart's collective leadership stance as a unionist and a trade union member and leader. He talked about his 2 leadership examples of when leaderships went really well, and he gave an example clinically and from a trade union perspective. And then he gave his 3 tips and points for us all to be better leaders. It was really amazing to speak to Stuart, and I thank him really a lot for taking the time. I hope he has a great holiday, and I hope you tune in with us for our next episode. Now, We've got some amazing guests coming up, such as Calvin Moorley and Brendan McCormack, both professors in nursing, and we're hoping to get some more guests on the podcast. So if you're interested in being on the podcast, please do get in touch. If you know anyone who might be, or you would like to be on the podcast, again, please do get in touch. Cheers now.